Using punishment with children is very familiar and common. The topic of punishment is extremely interesting because it is a part of everyday life. It can help but also harm children. The use of various forms of punishment is controversial, and there is a great deal of scientific research on when and how to use punishment to change child behavior. Consequently, there are a couple of videos in this series on punishment and its effects on children. This video is on a punishment technique referred to as timeout. As most of the topics of this series, you will have heard about the concept and may even use a timeout regularly at home. Yet timeout is rarely used in a way that would make it effective. So let us go through the procedure, what it is and is not, and how to make it really work. So what is timeout? Well, the full term is time out from reinforcement, and that describes the procedure. Timeout consists of a brief period of time in which the child does not have access to the usual rewards in the situation, that is, reinforcement, which is a more technical term for rewards. Timeout is a break from the attention and the rewards that are available. The usual rewards could be just being in the presence of others, receiving parent, teacher, or peer attention, or participating in some activity or game that is going on. After engaging in some unwanted behavior, the child is required to go to timeout. While taking this timeout, the child cannot participate in activities and is not engaged in any conversation with anyone. Now, many parents consider timeout as a period of time in which the child should think about what he or she has done. That actually has nothing to do with timeout at all. Thinking about what one has done is fine. It's just that it's not related to how the procedure works or why it is effective. And more generally, thinking about something is usually not a way to build habits or change behavior. Of course, I'm not against thinking. I've even tried it once or twice myself. But the goal of these videos is to change and develop child behavior. The critical feature for timeout is a brief and temporary period of time without access to what is going on in the current situation. The most common form of timeout in the home is having a child go to his or her room or sitting in a safe place, like at the kitchen table or the bottom stair of a staircase in the home, or being in any place where the child can be let alone but is safe and can be supervised. During timeout, there is no talking or playing with the child. Now, one does not have to exclude the child so that they are placed in a special room. If the child can stay in a room where the behavior occurred and not be involved in any activity for a brief period, that is timeout also. For example, if the child is playing a game or playing a video, timeout could be stopping or taking away the game for a brief period. The idea is that during this brief period, the child is away from enjoyable or routine activities. That is why going to one's room may or may not be the best form of timeout. In one's room, there may be all sorts of enjoyable activities, playing with toys, or a video game, or even watching TV. Ideally, timeout would be spending time in a place that is not very interesting or is even boring. You decide that part. Sitting somewhere in the home where there is not access to activities is the better procedure. In elementary schools, timeout sometimes consists of a brief period where the child is sent outside the classroom and must stand in the hall. Well, that is well intended, but in the hall there may be many interesting things, like other children or teachers passing by, or it may be interesting to listen in on what's going on in the other classes. This is not timeout if the rewarding events are possible during that time. There are 5 ingredients for using timeout. First, decide exactly what behavior will serve as the basis for asking the child to go to timeout. It is important that the child know in advance what the behaviors are that will lead to timeout. This can be one or more different behaviors. Just be explicit about what the behaviors are. As usual, it is helpful to write down exactly what the behaviors are so it is clear to you and the child. Step 2, decide what will be used as timeout. This could be a place like the child's room, sitting in a corner, sitting on a chair or a couch, anything that is not interesting and part of activities, as I mentioned. Step 3, decide how long timeout will be and be brief. This is very difficult for parents to do, but 1 to 10 minutes will get all the benefits. And even here, 10 minutes is really not any better than 5 minutes when it comes to actually changing child behavior. This is hard to believe, but the research shows that more or longer timeout is not more effective. So if you think 20 minutes is great and 45 minutes would even be better, this is not true. In fact, 2 to 5 minutes, maximum of 10, would all be equally effective. I will say more about this in a minute. 4, have a backup punishing event. By backup punishing event, I mean something that your child would lose if he or she does not go to timeout when you ask. So, for example, you might say to your child, "You hit your sister, you have to take a timeout. Go to your room for 5 minutes. I will come and get you when 5 minutes is over." So what if your child does not go to timeout and even says, "No, I'm not going"? Now you say very calmly, "If you do not go to timeout now, you will lose a privilege." Now, it is important that you have a backup penalty. Usually this is a loss of some privilege, and that will work fine. So your child does not go immediately to timeout, and you say, "You have a choice. You can go to timeout now for 5 minutes, or you will not be able to watch TV tonight." Do not argue, do not say any more, and then within the next 30 seconds or so, if the child does not go to timeout, you say, "Okay, tonight you cannot watch TV," and then walk away. Do not get into any argument, and if the child goes to timeout now, at this time it's too late. It is critical not to argue and just walk away. 5th step, finally, explain all of this to your child when everyone is calm. You'll explain the behavior, where the timeout place is, and what the backup privilege is. It is even a good idea to practice going to timeout when the child is not being punished. So when everyone is calm, maybe on a Saturday morning, I recommend you go to the child and say, "Let us just practice going to timeout just to see how it works." Say, "Okay, pretend you've done something," give an example, and I say, "Okay, you have to go to timeout for 5 minutes. Now let's walk together to timeout," and you sit down. "Okay, pretend 5 minutes is up." "Okay, timeout is over." Now if you do this practice, praise the child for going to timeout and sitting down and doing what you wanted, even though it's just practice. That will increase compliance when timeout is actually used for real. Okay, here are the steps again if you would like to try this at home. Consider this a practice assignment. If you are using timeout already, this will help because it will add some nuances that really influence how effective it is. First, decide the behavior that warrants a timeout. It is useful to write that down just so it is really clear both to you and your child. Second, decide what location will be used as timeout. This could be sitting in a corner or on a chair or a couch without anything to do. Third, decide how long timeout will be. Be brief. I suggest 5 minutes as a maximum. More is not better or more effective. Fourth, have a backup punishing event if the child refuses to go to timeout. I suggest loss of TV or video games for one evening, but nothing more than 24 hours. You are a better judge of what would be good to use here. With the loss of a privilege, more is not better. Take away a privilege for an evening or a day, but not more. Also, take away something immediate, not something that is next weekend or a few days from now. Better to take away something for tonight or today than some activity on the weekend. Fifth, explain all of this to your child when everyone is calm. While not explicitly stated here in these steps, you should always remember to keep an active eye on the positive opposite behavior as well. So circle back to step 1. What behaviors warrant timeout that you would like to decrease in your child? And what are the positive opposites of those behaviors? It is important to make note of that so you can praise it as much as you can. So there are 2 common practices that really make timeout ineffective. And once you use these, it's downhill fast. So don't do these. Do not physically force your child to go to timeout. Physical force would be grabbing the child by the arm, walking him, kind of forcing him to go there, taking him there, in some cases even lifting the child up. Physical coercion during a timeout should not be used because if you do that, it is very likely you will be hit by the child, resisting and flailing his arms. This is a standard reaction. Physical contact during punishment with a child is likely to lead to aggression, more oppositional behavior, crying, and tantrums right then and there. This is likely to make you furious and even stronger in your use of force. Now we are way beyond the benefits of a calm timeout. The situation has escalated and got out of hand. In short, no physical force in using timeout. Second, do not lock the child in the room for timeout. You might say, if I don't lock the child in the room, he will come out of the room and not stay in timeout. But locking leads to escalation of aggressive behavior, crying, and tantrums. The child is likely to try to get out because that is a pretty normal human reaction of being locked in any place. There's likely to be screaming and banging the door, all made worse because of locking the door. So if the child comes out, take away a privilege and walk away. You could give a warning. If you do not go back into the room right now, you will lose TV tonight. But locking is not the answer. It is almost guaranteed to raise new behavior problems. A hard part for parents in all of this is walking away. If you are getting angry or frustrated, that is really understandable. Send the child to timeout or take away a privilege and then walk away. That is easier said than done. We actually have parents practice walking away at this time so they do not get into arguments. We pretend to argue and be an annoying child while the parent practices walking away. It's very difficult to do. The most important guideline in using timeout I have saved for the last. And I've done that because it's the least well known and requires a bit of an explanation. The effectiveness of timeout depends heavily on what is being done to develop positive behavior when the child's not in timeout. So, for example, let's say your child was very mad and started swearing at you. You do not want the child to swear, and you told him that swearing would lead to timeout. He swears again, and you tell him he has to go to timeout, and he goes. Okay, that is fine, but by itself, that will not have much impact on swearing in the future. Punishment, whether timeout, loss of privilege, reprimand, or something even more severe, does not develop the positive behaviors you wish. You want the child not to swear, even when he gets mad or upset. Timeout can temporarily suppress behavior, but does not teach the appropriate behavior or teach those habits you want to develop in the child. The general rule is getting rid of behavior does not automatically mean that the behavior you want is more likely. The behavior you wish to eliminate comes up again and again unless you train the child to engage in other alternative behaviors. Coming up again and again is why parents say, if I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. Well, that's normal, because if you're not developing behavior, you'll have to say it 2,000 times. Said another way, the effectiveness of timeout depends on what you are doing to develop the positive behavior you wish. Now, this is unfamiliar and is referred to as time in. So what exactly is time in? I thought you'd never ask. Time in refers to what a parent is doing to develop the positive behavior when the child is not in timeout. If you send your child to timeout for swearing, time in would be praising the child at other times when he's not swearing. Maybe he gets mad or looks upset, and you jump in and say, you just got upset and did not even swear. That's really great. Do this just for a week or two, and that will be the time in that completely makes a difference. Another example. If you send your child to timeout for not doing what you ask, time in would be praising the child at other times when she does what you asked. Now, it is natural to neglect the good behavior you see. Our brains are hardwired to pick out what is annoying and bothersome and negative in the world. Yet if you are punishing behavior, it is absolutely essential to praise the positive opposite or the behavior you want to develop. Now, many parents believe that when your child has done something you want to eliminate, something horrible, something you want to get rid of, this is a teachable moment. Not really. It's an intense moment, it's a clear moment, but it's not the time to teach. For example, when someone is drowning, that's not the time to teach them how to swim. The best teaching occurs when conditions are calm and with repeated practice. Teach someone how to swim and handle themselves in the pool. and that is the way to help someone so they are less likely to drown. Teaching focuses on practicing the desired behavior repeatedly, and the moment something is at a crisis or dramatic is not especially useful unless there's repeated practice of the behavior. So time in is praising the desired behavior you want to get and getting that repeated practice. I mentioned at the beginning of this video and other videos that many of the tools I'm discussing are familiar, but how they are used and how to make them effective is much less familiar. Here's a great example. Most of us know about timeout, but the effects of timeout depend very heavily on time in. Now, a separate video is on the topic of developing positive opposites. This is really relevant here because time in refers to the period in which you are actually reinforcing positive opposites, the behaviors you want to see in the child. So there are some questions and concerns when someone talks about timeout, and let me cover the most common ones. First question, so is timeout really effective? Well, it depends completely on how it is done. If you are just isolating a child for a while for inappropriate behavior, that's not likely to work at all. To change behavior, it's time in. Time in is what's critical. And when reinforcing the positive opposite, timeout can help a lot. A second question, why am I recommending brief timeout? Well, the research is clear on this. Brief timeout of a few minutes is as effective as any longer period. Mild timeout does the trick and is all that is needed. Understandably, parents have difficulty in a punishment that seems so mild and not equal to the crime. Parents often want a punishment that seems proportional to what the child has actually done. And they want to teach justice and making sure punishment matches the crime, and they want to teach about being fair, all very reasonable. Consider this example. Your child has just shattered an heirloom pottery cup. This cup was made by one of your relatives many generations ago. The heirloom was passed down from generation to generation, beginning with a distant relative that was married to one of your great Neanderthal, whatever, uncle. Now you have this heirloom cup. Your child drops a basketball on this cup and it is now completely shattered. When you see the cup that's shattered, you are not likely to listen to a psychologist who says, "Oh, 2 minutes of timeout, that should do the trick." You feel strongly that something more than a few minutes of timeout is needed here to match the crime. Yet out of frustration, I have seen extremes of timeout, 3 hours of timeout. A couple of times I've seen 24 hours where a child was placed in timeout in his room where the parents slid meals under the door or opened the door briefly to put in food. We want brief timeouts not only because they are effective, but because we want the child back in the regular situation so the family, peers, and so on can reinforce positive behavior. In this case, the positive behaviors are being careful with delicate things and not playing basketball in the house. So these videos are about changing child behavior, but as parents we have other goals too. But just to be clear, in terms of changing behavior, a brief timeout is fine. Same is true about taking away a privilege. Take away a privilege for one day, not a week or two. In most of these videos, I talk about one tool to change behavior. I present them separately to put in your behavior change toolkit. Timeout is a good example where two tools need to be used together. Timeout and developing positive opposites. Developing positive opposites is what one does in the time-in periods. These two tools go together, but only developing positive opposites is the one that actually teaches the new behavior. Said another way, emphasize time in. What is being done to obtain the behaviors is critical. There's no formula for this, but here's a guideline. Try to be sure that you reinforce the positive opposite 4 or 5 times more often than you punish a behavior, leading to timeout. In general, the ratio should be more times that you praise the positive opposite behavior than you punish the behavior you want to eliminate. If you are administering timeout 4 or 5 times a day, that usually means the positive opposite is not being praised very often. So let me summarize. We have covered timeout and how to make it effective. And timeout is a very interesting technique because the version that has filtered out to the public is the version that is not likely to work very well. Some of the key features we have discussed that are not usually mentioned are being very calm and using no physical force when you give a timeout, making sure timeout is brief, having a backup penalty if the child does not go to timeout, and avoid arguing when administering timeout. The key feature of the procedure: praise the positive opposite behavior. The most novel part of what we have discussed today is time in, praising the behavior you wish when the child is not in timeout. Now, timeout has been used extensively in the home and the classroom, and is a great tool when combined with developing the positive opposite. So in your behavior change toolkit, this video combines two tools to help you develop the behaviors you wish in your child. We'll have more tools in other videos.